Hello, and welcome to Conversations from the Alcove. My name is Caridad Svich. I'm the Artistic Director of the Alcove New Play Development Program at the Lucille Lortel Theater in New York City. And Conversations from the Alcove is a series that is a series of chats, I should say, with playwrights and theater makers on art, theater craft, and the world, not necessarily in that order. Today's guest is Andrea Stolowitz. Before I hand it over to Andrea, I'd like to do a brief audio description of myself and then formally introduce you to Andrea. I am a fair-skinned person with brownish, goldish, auburnish, sometimes hair. Today it's piled up in a bun, but I have bangs on my forehead. They're very fluffy today because it's humid. I have cat eye sort of glasses on the tip of my nose. I have red lipstick, brown eyes, and I'm wearing a red top. I don't often wear this top. So a red top that has like bluish flowers on it, not big flowers, small flowers dotted across it. You'll probably see more of the red today and less of the flowers. My background behind me is white background. You might occasionally see the outline of a lamp in the corner, may or may not, depending on how I move. Andrea, what can I say, Andrea? I've known Andrea for a very, very long time. I'm so delighted that they're here today. They're one of our commissioned playwrights, yay. So I'll do a brief description. This is from their website, which you should check out, by the way. It's really beautiful. Andrea Stolowitz is an internationally produced playwright and librettist and dual U.S. German citizen, reclaimed from her Jewish ancestry. Andrea splits her time between New York, Portland, Berlin, and Ireland. Ooh, very fancy. 3-time winner of the Oregon Book Award in Drama. Her plays have been developed and presented nationally and internationally at venues such as the Long Wharf, the Old Globe, Cherry Lane, New York Stage and Film. Some of her plays include the Berlin Diaries, which you'll see in her tag there under her screen, Elegy Play, Recent Unsettling Events, Ithaca, Antarctica, Snow in Cairo, so many, it's so wonderful. They're an MFA playwright alumni of UC San Diego, also my alma mater, yay, UCSD, and has been an educator on different faculties at Willamette, University of Portland, Duke University, UCSD, and NUI Galway. Many things, of course, much to talk about with Andrea. And welcome, Andrea.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Super. So, as you know, for those of you that know the series, I always start with the same question, which is how are you grappling with making sense of or making chaos of the chaos that we're living in with the climate crisis in terms of your art making?
Yeah, I thought about that as I regularly swim in the rivers here in Oregon where I'm right now. And I was thinking about that today as I was swimming from one side of the Willamette River to the other, watching the cars and the traffic go above me on this very big bridge called the Hawthorne Bridge that goes up and down when ships come in. And I thought the really great thing about swimming is you explore the landscape on a really micro level. And that made me think about how much traveling I do in my career. And it made me think about movements in Europe, like Katie Mitchell, who no longer travels, or people who, if they do travel by train. And I feel like in my practice of art making, I'm struggling with wanting to be live in a place, but not wanting to create the environmental ripples to arrive there. And I guess that's sort of a preoccupation at the moment because I so much believe in liveness, both in the rehearsal process and in the performance process, which isn't to say that there aren't ways of liveness being incorporated into a digital arena, certainly for access availability. But I guess I struggle right now with how to do a work that I love because it's about being physically present and struggling with the climate implications of being physically present. So, I don't have an answer, but that's what I was thinking about this morning in my very micro swim across the Willamette River.
Right, yes. Being physically present involves, our industry is, I was just talking to a colleague this morning about is something that our industry, not the form. So theater as a form is beautiful and sacred and all the things, but the industry has a lot of issues, I think, with basically slow walking themselves into the climate crisis. You know what I mean? Like, we should have been ready 50 years ago, right? And I think, and now what I'm just seeing is some conversations, but not a lot of action. And some of the conversations are about, well, in 10 years' time, we'll deal with it. And I'm like, yo, we're in it. I don't know what you're talking about, but we're in it. And I think that, and I think, I often say it, and I don't know if people are angry about this, but, the idea of doing a world tour, like buses and trains and planes and this and that and boats and
the sets from the Schaubühne get put on a boat, and there's barges all over with the Schaubühne sets, one going to Brooklyn, one going to China. I mean, they're touring worldwide to be live in a place, right? It's like
to me it just seems bonkers and contributing to the pollution of the planet and its ravaging. Feels so antithetical to what we do, right? So that's on a very practical level. Like, we have to really change the way we do things. But I think that as a playwright, I wonder how it's affecting your facing the page, the structures that you make as a writer, the kinds of stories you want to tell.
Yeah. I mean, I think more and more, and I don't know that this is a direct relation to the climate crisis. I think it's a real sort of in reaction to so many crises, including the climate crisis. But I have sort of lost a lot of interest in the fictive world, and I've become really, really interested in verbatim work, interviews, process-based work, somewhere between applied theater devising and social practice theater. And I don't really have a name for it because I kind of draw from all of these inspirations. And as well, certainly well-crafted naturalism. I certainly draw from that in, my desire to tell story. But I think the reason I'm so focused on the real text is because I don't want to hide behind fictive story. I feel like the world is in such a crisis that I kind of want to say, these are the real words of the real people. I'm not making it up. And I think that's a response to this crisis that I feel, and also this separation that we have. I have teenagers, and I don't think that they have a clear separation between confessional things on TikTok that might be already created, right? They're mediated, and the real world of who we meet and some scripted show. They don't know what television is. They don't know what television is. They know what content is. And so I feel like when I'm live, what a unique moment to pull in other real live things. And I guess that's my fascination right now. And I think it's because of all of these real life crises of how people can speak to each other or not speak to each other.
Yes. Is that related to, I wonder, there are many theories around this that have been swirling about, because obviously there are many writers that are feeling this, I wouldn't say anxiety, but maybe responsibility around forefronting the real or nonfiction as opposed to fictive work. And, partly I think that's due to we are in the era of disinformation. So that's part of it. How do you parse through very sophisticated disinformation strategies that are working on us constantly as spectators, as viewers, fellow citizens of the world. So there might be some artists are talking about that as sort of why they're moving in this direction, but others I've been seeing people talk about a distrust of fiction, And I wonder if it's something you share, or is this purely coming from I just want to stage the real?
I mean, I think it started a couple, maybe like, I would say in like 2012 or 13, maybe 14. I read this book called Reality Hunger, which I think is something that a lot of people have been influenced by. And it sort of opened my eyes to why we have this desire for the real right now. And I then stopped judging my own desire for the real. You know, I think I was judgmental about it. I was like, oh, why don't you just keep working in a, you know, I know I'm very unkind to myself as an artist. You know, if someone else were to tell me something, I'd be like, what an interesting thought and idea. But to myself, I'm like, so in which ways are you failing? You know, but I suppose we all do that. But I think that kind of started it. And then, you know, I had been always working for a long time on interview-based work. Ithaca is an interview-based work that's fictive, right? I did interviews with returning combat soldiers women combat soldiers from Afghanistan and Iraq, so U.S. soldiers, and did like 30 or so interviews and then created a fictive script. And a lot of people who I'd interviewed came to see it, and that was really satisfying. And then I began to think, okay, that was great, but is there a way to allow their own words to kind of combine, and I don't become like the purveyor or the authorial voice as much? And I think that sort of coincided with my work. I worked for since 2013 to 2021 with a devised theater company in Portland called Hand to Mouth Theater. And so I think the ensemble created devised work kind of dovetailed with my desire to not preference story, or to allow, you know, if there's all these elements of theater, which we know there are, even just the Aristotelian ones, right? If we preference spectacle or music or movement, even character, text or rhythm over story, what happens? And so I think those kind of all came together. And then I said, oh, well, the things that were interesting to me in the world were things that were really happening. And I guess it all just became, can I serve as a facilitator or a platform? But you know, I'm still working. It's like kind of a growing practice, you know, it's developing, because I do still have an authorial voice, and it would be silly to pretend otherwise. So I'm playing with all of that.
Cool. What rules do you give yourself when you're working on verbatim or docudrama work?
Such a good question. So I can conflate characters, right? So I'm allowed to conflate. So or composite, as I would say, right? But I'm not allowed to remove from context. Like if something's intended a certain way, I'm not going to remove it to make it seem like it's something else, even though I might need that at that point in the sort of story or arc of the thing I'm making. And the thing I absolutely love doing, of course, I mean, not of course, but I love doing, is to separate the performer from the character they're playing in many ways. And one of the, you know, the sort of the cheap and easy way is each performer plays multiple characters. So but in that fragmentation, we're allowed to see the artifice of theater and the magic of theater. And so I think that like that's sort of this rule is let us not present these people as a documentary might with an actor doing each one, but rather like let's expose the artifice, and then let me take you on this journey of meeting these characters whose stories kind of dovetail in ways. Like an example might be like, I mean, the bad example is, I've never heard anyone tell a story about a cat shitting in a sandbox, and then someone's on, like, you know, the next person is like, this cat is always shitting in my kid's sandbox or whatever, you know, like that's a totally dumb version, but I love that kind of juxtaposition. Or, you know, I don't know, or sometimes we get into a more moody place, but I think ultimately it's important to me to show that there's an artifice here, because I am still an authorial voice. I am still creating it. And so I guess I don't want to be dishonest about that. And so yeah, compositing characters is important because just really it's because of cast size and the ability of the audience to be able to relate. So I can't afford 12 actors playing 47 characters. And I find that if I have one actor playing more than 2.5 characters, it's hard. We keep it in our head like, oh, they're this person and this person, and maybe there's like a little person that comes in and we get it. We're like, oh, that's them. And we see them and we associate that. But when it gets to be more than that number, it becomes quite confusing. And so there isn't really a way for me in the economy that I work in to be able to have the largeness, although I think working on that large scale would be really interesting and fun. And I don't know what that would do, but it's not practical. I can't actually afford it because most of these projects I end up funding myself. I end up writing the grants for myself because theaters mostly want to produce plays, and those plays should be in a neat scripted fashion that can be taken and then rehearsed in 3.5 weeks, and with hopefully minimal number of characters and a really clear message, so that it can be plugged into a season. And the less and less I work like that, the harder it is to have anybody else pay for the project. So I become like a lead on a project, and I tend to break my projects up into phases so that I can, if I run out of money, I feel like each phase has a culminating event, and I feel like each phase delivers something so that it's worth it to make the art for me, my collaborators, and the audience. And for me, when I say that worth it, I mean that we've all had some kind of interaction that leaves us changed from how we entered the project. And because I can't guarantee going to production, I don't have the funds for it, I don't know, and I don't want to. It's too disappointing to spend 4 years working on something with the idea of it'll get to the stage and that'll happen. What if it doesn't? What if I can't? So what happens then? How do I do that? And so I think, that becomes very useful. And I guess other rules of text. I mean, I'm kind of working on it because I'm want to be respectful of the people that I interview, but I also want to be able to use the material to create a piece of art. And so I'm kind of working on that. I always get permission, and I always say, I'm using this for a theater project. If your words are used, you won't be identified by name. It could happen in a very in a community where everyone knows each other, that by context people are identified. And so I have to make sure with them that that's okay. And to the point of phases, I might start a project and everyone's okay with it. And then I come back and we make something with the actors, and 5 people from the community could be like, this has never happened, but they could say, oh gosh, my neighbor will recognize who I am. No, we can't use this text or this text, right? I mean, hopefully that won't happen. Usually it doesn't happen, but it could happen. And so then I say, oh, okay, well, thank you. We've had this experience with this text, and it's so integral to the process that we can't go on without it. Or I say, okay, thank you, and I pull one of the other composite things. But those are like little interventions that could happen that I think are important, because why do we make this work? For whom are we making it? Is it all just transactional? Why do we, right? Like, what is it? And so I think it's a gift to hear somebody's story, and I think should be a gift to them that is part of another piece of art. And if it doesn't feel like a gift, then I guess I just say, okay, we've had this experience, and I guess we're done now, which is weird. So as I said, it's a developing practice. Thank God I'm not 187 years old, because it could take forever. But, so I just try to do it as I go, and each project seems very different. Like some projects are a big landscape and no one's going to recognize anybody, and some, like the one I'm working on in Ireland right now, is really teeny tiny, and it's all about this community. And I don't know what'll happen. Like, do we mention people by name? Do we replace their names? Like, what do we do? I'll just have to see.
Yeah, I hear you. And this question of the small cast size, being financially feasible, right, as well. This is something I was just reading a blog piece about an artistic director that shall remain nameless, talking about their just average day around finances, and it was really dispiriting. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure you can imagine, but it was literally about okay, can it be 2 people less in that show so that I can afford to produce it? And like literally counting every single penny in this climate of forced austerity where we have, trillionaires, trillionaires literally on our earth. And I saw some absurd number today, $90 million being withheld from a political campaign.
I saw that.
Yes, by a super PAC. And all I could think about was $90 million could create a lot of incredible progressive change in a country with no universal health care and with people in poverty and the unhoused population. I mean, just exponential, just go down the list, right? So it just throws into relief that the climate of forced austerity, of course, is a created one, and then artists and artistic producers. And I'm just going to use the U.S. for the example at the moment because we're a country with no art subsidy, are pushed into this hyper aware, vigilant, being counter mode, right? Yeah. Whereas in other countries that do have subsidy, I was just talking to a director who was doing a show in Latvia, and he was like, it was for the Latvia National Theater, and the actors are hired all year.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just like, what?
Yeah. Well, get this. So last year I was visiting a friend of mine who sings for the state opera in a little town in former East Germany called Schwerin, and it's very lovely. And they have the state opera there. They have the state ballet there. Well, so it's like from Mecklenburg. So every city of every I guess county in Germany has it's big theater for that region, right? And so they have the dance theater, the opera, and then what they call Sprachtheater, so the speaking theater, right? The kind that we not opera, not dance, like the theater. And I was talking to the artistic director or maybe the dramaturg, I can't remember what their title was, but they were saying that in the United States, I have to write mainly small plays because they were saying, oh, maybe we could collaborate and do one of your plays because the Berlin Diaries was in Berlin. And I said, oh yeah, it's great. It has only 2 performers, and their face fell. And they said, oh, well, we can't do a play with just that small cast. And I said, why? And they said, oh, because we have 25 performers that are on salary and we have to use them. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. It's so interesting to have to work on a big scale. You cannot work on a small scale. So it felt like an opposite problem. But to me, of course, the grass is always greener. And I thought, oh, what an amazing thing. And of course, that's not entirely true. They can plan in something small as long as they have jobs for the other actors. But essentially, they need to justify why they have 25 actors on staff. And so they better use them. And that just feels like in a way, another artistic obstacle, but also a gift just to,
to be able to, yes, I know, where they're not counting, if we do 1 big show in the season, then we'll have to do 4 small shows or 3 small shows to compensate. That's the U.S. model, right? The U.S. model is to do 1 big show, maybe, because that's the only one we can really throw money at, and then the other ones have to be super small.
And I mean, there's this question of regionality too, which I think is interesting because, I notice the worse the economy is and the lower the arts budget, the more art institutions want to work with local artists. And the more flourishing they feel their budgets are, the more eager they are to bring in talent or plays from elsewhere. And, there's a kind of an irony of that. And when you think about the environmental impact of bringing people in and housing them and all of that, I just think there's kind of something a little backwards in the way we do it here. And it's sort of like you're only really counted if you're not in the place that you live, and if you live in the place that you are, the only time they want you is when that's all they can afford. And that feels sort of disheartening. and it feels disheartening. Yeah, it just feels disheartening on many levels. Whereas in other countries, there's certainly like, there's a desire to bring Schaubühne productions from Berlin all over the world. Of course, even to Brooklyn, where the tickets are 16 times the price. So. But I do think that there's this sense of place that's missing, and that is also kind of an answer to some of the environmental questions. I don't feel that local places really cherish their local artists, except for when it's convenient for a grant or for the economy. And I think it's always sort of placed on the audiences. The regional theater movement exists to bring things from New York to the regions. That was like sort of the conceit. And maybe that's true, but what if it's not? Like, those are all resources that, then you suddenly have a local economy and a local artist economy. And yeah, that's not people. I live in Portland part of the time, and I don't see people being able to survive here as artists. And I don't see the kind of value system shifting. So in Cork, Ireland, everybody has a day job. Most people have a day job that's not called making art, and so rehearsals are in the evening. Even for the more professional shows, or they tour in or whatever, right? So there's, in these local places, this desire to behave as one would in the economy of New York, where just different ways to earn money at different times, and where you would rehearse during the day for reasons of wanting to let people go home and be with their families and whatnot. And so I just wonder, in each place, how do we actually honor the art infrastructure of that place? And I don't have any answers to that either, but it does seem odd for me to go to all these other places to be rewarded or lauded, or even just to be able to make work, even to be able to get grants, and even, so I live in the irony of that too, considering our climate crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you. I wanted to touch on this notion of the transactional. We've been chatting offline about this a little bit, but I want to sort of bring it online with our audience, and mainly to do with the transactional relationship between institutions and artists that you described, and how the difficulty of sustaining a relationship, sustaining a place that believes, feeling that the relationship you have with the organization perhaps is valid and and that they value you. And so I guess, obviously it affects our work in terms of what we make and how we make it, but I wonder too about the position of the artist in that community, in your local community, where we're talking about local, right? So I was thinking about, like, if you're working within an organization and then that organization values you, and then you're like, okay, great. And then at some point you realize, I talked about this a long time ago in an essay where I talked about when an artist feels that they're being treated as if they're for hire, but it's never like written down that way. Do you know what I mean? It's just kind of like, oh, you did a gig, awesome, and then you never hear from that organization ever again.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you want to tease out in this area a little bit.
I think I have always looked for places where I would be able to kind of have like a permanent artistic home. And I think it's sort of like a naive thing and almost like childish, like, oh, I want to be there and I want to be able to grow and have my family love me and like be like, yes, inhabit this box or change completely. And we just love you and your work so much. And that's a really lovely, lovely idea. And it's not something that is really tenable because artistic directors change. So even simply, you're working under an artistic director and you establish a relationship and they like your work and they even commission something. And then another artistic director comes along and of course they don't want to be... Actually, I've been told this, that, every artistic director, when they come along, they want to work with their people, right? They want to work. And so I never considered myself as an artist to be anyone's people. I just kind of feel like I kind of exist in this frame of I make art with places where I've had relationships, and I try to make art where I live. And And so it feels interesting to have to reimagine a relationship every time somebody comes, as if it's some kind of business transaction. I mean, I am not an associate artistic director. I mean, I guess I understand why somebody comes and they want to bring their dramaturg or their literary person or their set builder or their lighting designer. And then it seems like, as I've been told by artistic directors, well, people come and they want to make it the place their own, and they don't want to have to inherit somebody else's vision, or artists who are, stuck there with this artist that they don't really love, and they wish that some other artist could be there that they do love. And you think, okay, well, I'm just making art, and I don't really know that we need to love it. Like, I don't know, but I think the answer is that I was naive, and that really my artistic home is for me to create and bring with me. And there is no place. There are places where for a time, financially or aesthetically or space-wise, things can work out where you kind of are, organically gravitating, or perhaps where your work has value because maybe of your identity. Maybe perhaps like the theater is eager for you to be participating in their programming for reasons outside of your art. They might really be interested in your art because perhaps it could sell tickets. I mean, I don't know very much art that really does that, but there could be, or maybe there's just other reasons why it's important for them to continue a relationship with you. And that is sort of a level of transactionality that feels like it makes sense in a business arrangement. But, universities, not that they're the bastion of everything really good right now, but I mean, having worked at a lot of them and still working at them, but I do think that, you earn tenure, you earn when in the good situations, or like some kind of longevity in a place, and then the dean can come and go, and the provost can come and go, and the president can come and go, but you're not always coming and going. And it does have this very and in theater, people tend to move around a lot, right? Like artistic directors move around a lot. They're moving up a rank, and when they get to the one that they want to stay in, then they stay a long time. It's often couched in this term of, younger artistic directors will say, I don't believe I should spend more than 5 years in a place because I should be like opening up that spot to somewhere else. And of course, that's true until they reach the spot where they're like, this is it. I'd like to stay here and feed my family and have a stable place to live. And those are all wonderful and valid things. And I think that the transactional nature of being an artist is what's embedded in that, because there's no real reason why a playwright needs to be embedded in a place. And if you are embedded in a place, if you have the good fortune of doing that, then you are an inheritable thing when somebody else comes along and wants a different thing. And that feels, I never thought of myself as a creator of material that fills slots and is transactional. And I have to think of myself that way because that's in fact apparently the way it works.
Yeah. I was thinking though about there's some. So I've been in situations where I've been commissioned by a theater, for example, a few times, and knowing that they're going to do the show. So which is lovely, right? Which is lovely. One of the things that did for me was that I wrote those shows specifically for that venue. Like in my brain, I was thinking about that stage space. I was thinking about what was feasibly possible on that space, what their resources were, et cetera. And I kept asking questions in my writing process of like, can I do this? Can I do that? Are you able to afford this? And sometimes they would say, go for it. We'll figure it out, right? So I was thinking a little bit also about the relationship between a playwright and the architecture of a theater space. When you know that that's the one you're writing for, in a sense, and how that changes what you make.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I had the good fortune of being commissioned and with a guaranteed production one time. And that was first of all, it was like heart stopping because it was terrifying because I was like, this is going up. It better be good. I had gone away to a residency and I at residencies, everybody else has a good time and goes on walks and relaxes. And all the visual artists are like looking at their color palette, or they're knitting something with like copper wire or whatever, and I'm just like totally like freaking out. But, it was such a joy because I knew that it was going to happen. And I knew what space it was going to happen in. And it was really fun to be able to write for a particular space and kind of think about the theater magic that could happen there, and even get people excited about it early on, like designers who would be like, oh my gosh, there's going to be a roller coaster ride, or, like how do we want to do that? And just the excitement of bringing those design questions just as part of the process, like almost a dramaturgy, almost like, I think I'm thinking of this. And, it feels fun. It feels fun to be early on in those conversations. But I haven't had, except for that one time, I haven't really had that good fortune. I have had other plays where I've been commissioned by producing organizations, and they don't end up producing the play. And I sort of go into every commission kind of assuming that that's what's going to happen. So when from the beginning that it will get done, it's just, kind of an extraordinary, creative, fun gift. I do think, though, I always am writing for small spaces because my work is attractive to a small audience. Like, I'm not going to fill a 550 seat theater in the United States. I can't comment on the other possibilities, but it's I'm always imagining like 100, like no more than 180, somewhere like maybe the biggest I could ever imagine would be like the A space in 59 or something, like somewhere like that, where you're just like, okay, it's got some capabilities, like some kind of black boxy flexible space kind of place where new plays live. Not that they can't live on Broadway. Of course, we see something very specific like Stereophonic on Broadway in the smallest, I think, of Broadway theaters. And but that's, even if you think about it, pretty small in comparison to, I don't know, the McCarter, which is what, like 2,000 seats or something?
Yeah, the McCarter is historically difficult to fill.
Yeah, and new plays I think kind of the new play model, I tend to think anyway about this small, flexible space. And it turns out that most new plays tend to be in those. So it's a good thing to imagine. When I teach, my students who, if they've seen theater at all, have usually seen larger productions or touring Broadway productions. And so, I teach little playwriting monologue, and they're imagining it on, I don't know, like a Broadway set or something. And so we do walk around the theaters on campus, and we look at the small spaces, and I encourage them to think about a space when they write, and I encourage them to think about a space that doesn't have a proscenium and doesn't have a curtain, and that might not even, that a room doesn't have to have a door, things like that. And I think it's because I tend to imagine those spaces as well for my work.
Yeah, I was just in a conversation yesterday about pedagogy and theater, students of theater, but many whom have not seen theater, or regularly, or even, and their reference point is, of course, the musical, which tends to be big. No, not always. There are chamber musicals, of course, and I think musicals are an incredible art form, and they keep our industry going, But of course, if you're a playwright, and that's your only reference point, then you're like, I can write, and then there are a chorus of people come in and you're like, well, maybe not, maybe that's not possible. And even you referenced Stereophonic. It's a play by David Ajmi, for those people that are watching that may not know this, which started at Playwrights Horizons, then went to Broadway very well, very successfully. It won the Tony Award and many other prizes. And that production at Playwrights cost, I think it was $1 million.
Yeah,
so, which is like really difficult. That's like a huge chunk of their, getting that fundraising to happen and getting that, just to do it properly, to do that show the way it needed to be done, right? So, the finances are a reality that we have to deal with, and that's not a huge cash show, and it's got a sizable cast, and plus all the ways of mediation that show needs to function, of course, add up to the fiscal side of this. I wanted to circle back here, or maybe forward, into speaking of recordings and stereophonic, thinking about culture and how art is a place of recording. So that art is a place that records time, it records what's happening in society. It is, when fascistic governments try to delete history, art is trying to recuperate history. I think that's one of our jobs. And so what fascinatingly, I think we're in a time right now in the U.S. where there's a lot of, as we know, a lot of energy from the far right they have been doing it, banning books, restricting speech, many levels of censorship that are happening. And what I see a lot is then artists retreating. Do you know what I mean? Like, well, let me make something that won't ruffle any feathers. When I actually think it's the opposite that we need to be doing. But anyway, I wonder if you've got thoughts around this, around acts of recuperation, around acts of recording.
I think ultimately that's what I try to do in my work, is sort of record something that I see, or a time, or a group, or a community, or people, and then have actors engage in that, so that that's recorded for them, and that they meet that thing, and they maybe are changed. Again, like, it's this levels of working, right? Like, maybe it'll never get to the audience, so what do I do? It's got to be satisfying for us in the room and the people that we meet. So I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about it. When you think about countries in Eastern Europe, or any country that lived under censorship, right? There was this notion of having to write through the censor, so that you would write something that, appeared to be this, and then everyone watching it would know it's that, but it'd be quite clever because it had to get through the censor, and there were consequences. And so it feels like in that kind of censorship, the necessity to get your vision out by hiding it, but knowing, it's like a secret letter or an Easter egg, feels so important. And I feel that because we don't have the obvious level of censorship here. I mean, although your references to the certainly right wing are well taken, like look at Florida. I mean, they just cut the arts budget. DeSantis cut the entire arts budget. So certainly, but I feel like the more insidious kind of censorship is the one where we don't even realize it. Like, kind of, I can't write a big play, or I know this will never get produced, or right. And that kind of censorship feels like the worst, because it's obvious when you're like, well, DeSantis cut the arts budget. This is a really reactionary state. Like, I will record this time and I will put it out there because this is not what this is about. Or when the federal troops came into Portland, right? It's like, and pulled people off the street at protests. And it's like, this moment has to be recorded. And if you try to silence me, I will record this, because we don't live in a totalitarian regime. And so those are the obvious ones, but I'm a little more scared of the ones that are the slowly boiling water, and we're the frogs in it, right? We slowly make these compromises of, I'd really like to get this produced. Okay, well, sure, one less character won't matter, or this won't matter. And we slowly see the kind of an artistic vision, and embedded in that artistic vision, because we're artists, at least I can't speak for others, but for me, I don't always know the thing that I'm making. I don't always know the impact of the thing that I'm making. I think about it, and I try with all the craft that I have gathered to put it all in there, but I sometimes just don't know. And when you start from a place of limiting, instead of exploring, I think the results become limited. And I think that that's sort of my fear in censorship, is that in my desire to make it in this art world of to live, that I slowly make things that are pleasing or the same aesthetic. Sort of another reason why, living cheaply and trying to fund projects. I mean, I don't know how this will all work out, but I just know that ultimately either I can have some kind of artistic freedom, but then I'm going to have to pay for every project myself, which is really exhausting. Like, the fundraising is exhausting, because then I also have to make the art. I mean, I even think sometimes all I do is apply for things and write grants. And but then I think the other side of it is, to not do that. And then I have projects going, and then I get to go there and I get to do those projects, or, you know, and then I'm like, oh, I wish I could only do this. And then I'm like, well, if I only do that, then I wouldn't get to choose this project, because this project might in fact not be saleable. Somebody might be like, I have 2 projects, this one, which I don't know what it is really, and it's got some people doing some verbatim things and some actors. And then there's this one, which is a very clear story that I can do in 3 weeks of rehearsal, and I'm going to do this one. And then mine doesn't go anywhere. And so I just try to make it myself. I don't know how this will go. I get a little tired, but it is nice, right? It's nice to have some agency, just some agency. And that agency is then, to your point of censorship, if no one's going to produce it anyway, and it's all lying on me to get grants to whatever, then I might as well just write what I want and play with the aesthetic and go for it, since nobody's going to do it anyway. And that feels like a really weird way to be an artist, but it also feels kind of comforting. You know, it's like, if no one's going to give me a permanent home, I'm going to make it myself. If no one's going to produce something or take a risk on something that they don't know because the economy isn't there and people are trying the best they can, then what am I going to do? What's my response as an artist? And so, yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. So I don't always ask this question, but I have been asking it recently of the guests on this series, which is, what are your dreams for the future of this field?
Wow. I mean, I guess so much of it is tied into my hopes for the future of the United States. So I guess I want to say, you know, we talk a lot about artists needing funding to be able to live, to have a sustainable wage. And that's certainly true. But what if we talked about how everybody who's a citizen here requires or even a non-citizen, anyone who is resident here requires a sustainable wage. And then the emergency that we're feeling in the art field becomes larger, right? This isn't different than, we workers who are underpaid and undervalued and not treated in a sustainable fashion are no different than any other industry. So what if, instead of saying we must fund the arts because, I love the arts, right? But instead of saying people need this, what if we say, like, this is what a society needs. We need people who have health insurance. We need people who have childcare. We need people who can do their job, and that job, when it's compensated to such a degree because it has to exist in a kind of an economy that doesn't value it, that we as a country say, oh, but we value this. And that is the problem with the United States, is that the art is not valued as a necessity, but neither is education. Look at public schools in Portland, Oregon, right? And the community colleges and the state schools, this is a crisis. So when you think about things like childcare, old age care, schooling, all these basic things that people need to go through life in a sustainable fashion, regardless of their profession, or their talent or their ability, right? If we made those things, that would solve the problems in the art world too. And so I think this conversation of let's fund the art because it's a driver of economic growth and all these things, it's like, okay, but this is just a subset of a larger problem. Like, what if something isn't a driver of larger economic growth? The public school system is not. It doesn't appear to be. It's a public good, right? It's a public good. Like, is it right? So I think that question of the hope for the field, I think, is so much tied in. When we talk about traveling from place to place, right? $90 million that you referenced earlier, that would probably go a nice way, at least making the Northeast corridor quite fast in terms of train travel. The whole country would be ideal. Look at the bullet trains in Japan, right? 5 hours and you're from one end to the other, right? Well, those could be very efficient ways to move people from place to place. And then as artists, we might say, oh, I feel comfortable going here. It still will take some resource. I don't know, right? But it's not just the same fossil fuel situation that we have on getting on a plane. but wouldn't that solution fix so many things, like ability for people to get to work? I teach in Salem. It's an hour south of Portland, and I have to drive because there's a train that goes from Portland to Salem, but it comes from Vancouver, Canada on the Amtrak, and it could be 26 hours late. And so I can't take that from the downtown of my city to the downtown, to the state capital. I drive. I drive an electric car, but I still drive, right? And so I think that these hopes for the field, maybe we don't think about the hopes for the field, but we feel like, what are the hopes for how we need to exist as humans, and who are the other humans that also need to exist? And in fixing or supporting that, we also support this field.
Yes, beautiful. I love it. I will vote for you, Andrea.
I'll just make some grants.
Some grants. I will vote for you. It's really wonderful, and it makes me think of I was just listening to a show on the radio this morning. I was talking about infrastructure, actually, and specifically the Northeast Corridor, but it was also talking about other, I can't remember who was being interviewed, but they kept saying, well, in the U.S., we can't do that because blah, blah. And I was like, why?
We can, of course we can.
We can. He said, no, the train system is too complicated. We can't do that. And I was like, this is just an excuse, so, but it just makes me think again about how we started this conversation, which is about, in a way, 50 years behind some necessary changes in our society, a stable infrastructure. I mean, what happened, for those who don't know, Houston flooded due to a Cat 1 hurricane, no infrastructure to kind of support like the people there, and it's happened exponentially. Have we learned nothing from Hurricane Katrina? Have we learned nothing from, it's just on and on and on, and I think that there are Band-Aid solutions that sort of are, kind of put forward, and then they get stuck in, political, you said this, I said that, and nothing really happens. Basically dysfunction, right? They get caught in political dysfunction at the expense of people and at the expense of society, actually, progressing, which I think is really ironic, given that I think the U.S. specifically is always saying that they're a progressive society. There's a kind of illusion in the U.S. of like, we are the place of progress. And I'm like, my God, the country's falling apart.
I mean, it depends how you define progress. I mean, it's so tied in a way with capitalism, right? Like the United States, because it's a capitalistic infrastructure, is extremely flexible, right? Because you don't have to pay long term, you can pivot, right? And so it's interesting. But there's if there's a political will. I mean, look, Germany, which is very green as a country, became ever so more green when there was a war in Ukraine, and their entire gas pipeline that was, going to function with Russia, that completely fell apart. And they saw the necessity to go green. They already were quite green, right? But so it became there's a political will, and then there's a social will. Astonishingly, the German government said everybody can't turn their heat on higher than the equivalent of 63 degrees in public buildings, right? And that for privately, it was suggested not to, because there wasn't enough energy the first year of the war with Ukraine. They were stockpiling, and public buildings did it, and people wore sweaters. And I'm sure it wasn't great, but nobody was like, you're taking away my right to have my temperature. It's this is what we do, right? We when there can be a political will, and if we can unite behind it, we can do that. And I think the environment is something that feels, to how we started off this conversation, of something that we have to be able to unify behind. It is our livelihood, and in 10 years it's too late, and 10 years ago it was too late. The one piece of hope that I will say is that The international climate change protocols have now officially declared climate change as human caused. So there's no more, we don't have to waste any more time talking about whether or not it exists and whether or not it's caused by humans. We know it exists. We know it's caused by humans. And so that might seem fairly obvious to you and to me, but it's, something that was in a big debate stage that is now over. And that means that companies now can begin to use their capitalistic notion of success in order to earn money, in order to develop technologies that will remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Like they can actually now problem solve in a way that the United States is good at with science and technology, because there will be a market for it. And so I don't know that I want to say that capitalism will save climate change, but at least we're now in a place where there's an economic driver to do that, whereas 20 years ago, the oil companies had dug in their heels and weren't going to. Now everybody recognizes this is going to happen, and the best way to make it happen is to jump on it economically, right? To get the jump, because there's going to be money to be made, and you don't want to be left in the dark in the desert of not making the money. You got to be an early adapter. And that's now how technology and venture capital is thinking in terms of this. This is a big problem facing the world. And if we can find the solution first, kind of like the COVID vaccine, we can, basically have the patent for it and we can sell it. And so I don't know, but at least we now know that humanity has caused climate change, and that there is some capitalistic incentive to solve it, other than just because we might all die on this planet.
Correct.
It's like, that's not enough.
Not enough. Yes, the threat of extinction has not been enough to but if there's an economic driver, then it becomes sort of something people can get behind, which tells you a lot about people's values. But that's for another show, another series maybe that I one day might do. It's so lovely to chat with you, Andreas. Thanks so much for making time. Really appreciate it. For those of you that don't know Andrea's work, seek it out. Please read the plays, look for the plays, keep your eye on the plays, when they will happen, all those good things. And if you watched the series before, you know what I do. I always wave so long, hit end recording, but then I stay online, offline from you, online with us, with Andrea, to say official thanks and so longs. So for now, thanks for watching or listening, whatever you're doing with Conversations from the Alcove. Check out the series, and more soon.